2 minutes after the hour. So welcome, everyone. I'm about to turn things over to my colleague, John Fremer, President of Caveon Consulting Services, and our special guest, a test security rock star, in my mind, certainly, Rachel Schoenig of ACT, where the two are going to be sharing important lessons learned from two monumental events, the Conference on Test Security and the European Association of Test Publishers. Now, before I turn things over to Dr. John, just some housekeeping. We do record this session. We will make the slides and the recording available to you. We'll be emailing out links for those things. Everyone is muted, but you do have the opportunity to ask questions through the dashboard in the GoToMeeting system. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. John Fremer.
Thank you, Steve. I'm pleased to have this opportunity. The world we live in is a very busy one, so to have folks join us is a privilege, and I try not to abuse it. We'll talk relatively briefly, and I'll do that part of it, about the European Association of Test Publishers. I'll talk about just a small sample from there. They don't devote as much attention to security, certainly even as the ATP in the U.S., and certainly nothing like the Conference on Test Security, which we'll spend the bulk of this time on. So we want to do a poll about to sort of learn how many attended either of those conferences. So if you would bring that up, Steve. Just click on one of those. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the poll is launched, and we'll give people, we've got about 2/3 that have responded. I'd like to get about 3/4, almost there. Okay, wow. Just a few more seconds, and I'll close it. Had nearly everybody respond, John, and here are the results. Are you seeing the results?
There's 8% who were at Conference on Test Security, and 92% did not attend either. So I am pretty sure that there's going to be new information for most of the folks on the call, which is good. So we're really serving the purpose. So let's move on then to a background about the European Association of Test Publishers. That image is Budapest, and it's really a terrific place, and not a place certainly that I had been to, nor when I talk to other folks that I know mostly in the measurement field, they haven't been there either. People tell me I like it as much as Paris. I didn't believe them, because I don't like any place as much as I like Paris, but I think it probably made my top 20, and I'm a hard marker in terms of cities. So the next slide. This is part of an annual series now of meetings of European testing professionals, but there are a good-sized group that come from the United States. All the major test delivery vendors, places like Question Mark, for example, are always there. And there are a smattering of people from China, Japan, and other countries. This year's theme was Growing Talent in Europe, Gaining Advantage Through Assessment. And that is very consistent with the fact that there are more people at this conference from the industrial organizational field than any other field. And but I am noticing, even within the IO group, more attention to security. Again, not as much as ATP US, certainly not as much as COTS, but at least there's some sessions now. So next slide. I want to talk about two sessions. One of them involved myself and Steve Addicott, and also Ardashir Jaranpaya, been practicing this name, from Cambridge Assessment. It's one of the largest testing organizations in the world, particularly in English language testing. And what we try to do is draw lessons from the past, going back pretty far. And my overall view is the quote you sometimes see, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Let's go to the next slide. there was cheating on the Imperial China selection exam, which ran for hundreds of years, and it was selecting people to serve in the imperial court. They really didn't want cheating. So the ultimate penalty was administered. They executed people for cheating. And that had some positive effect in that the historians think that cheating occurred only in about 60% of the people participating. So only 40% didn't cheat, even though you could be executed for cheating. I think they really, really wanted to get into the court, and the selection ratio was bizarre. You're talking about 1 in 10,000 or something that would ever get a job. Another example is the ancient Olympics, and I learned this while visiting ancient Olympian on a vacation trip. There were these statues going into the arena, and I asked about them, and they said, well, those were built from the fines levied upon cheating athletes. They built bronze statues of Zeus, long gone, melted down probably, and on each statue there was the offense of the cheating athlete, his name, all men in those days, and the city-state that they came from. So when you went into the arena, you had to walk by these statues that commemorated, in a way, past cheaters. Next slide. So my takeaways from that, not just those two cases, but from a bunch of cases that we pulled together, cheating was discouraged and punished. There are some quite official rules about testing. I have a number of them in my collection. They gave special attention to how to proctor, and some of the things that they did seem very, very modern, like the cheating cloak, which is a carryover from Imperial China, and there are many versions of the cloak out on Yahoo if you look up cheating cloak, Imperial China. And also they had the pattern of using publicity about misbehavior to try to deter people. A lot of the writing about the Atlanta public schools has that intention. Look what happened here. You don't want that to happen to you. So next slide. I want to talk about one other session, one that I knew well because Steve and I were in this one with Phil Dickinson of NCSBN, the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. And we called out some changes that are occurring. We continue to expect technology-based testing, growth in testing, particularly international testing. In the U.S., the kind of slogan, career ready, having a great deal of attention, and a lot of worries about privacy. Next slide. Phil Dickinson's presentation, and this is sort of foreshadowing what we're going to do next month, is that it's not enough to think that you can have validity with good content and solid psychometrics. If you don't have security, things do not hold together, and that security belongs, test security, up with psychometrics and content as key components of any program's validity efforts. So I think back to you, Steve.
Yeah, we're going to launch another poll. I had some feedback that I was tough to hear, so if I'm really loud now, I apologize. But we want to launch this next poll, which is, are your test security efforts focused on validity and ensuring validity of test results, or catching cheaters, or both? So people are beginning to respond, Dr. John. We'll give them a few more seconds. Looks like almost everybody has responded, so I'm going to close this up, and I'm going to share the results. Rachel, any reaction to this?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I'm very heartened by the fact that we're seeing so many people actually look at both. I think it indicates to me that really a lot of people are doing it based what I think is critical for any testing organization, and that is focusing on score validity and ensuring a level playing field when it comes to building a comprehensive test security framework for our organizations. I think it may also reflect the fact that especially that purple bar there, that there are some licensure and credentialing programs that need to focus not only on competency and whether the score is valid, but also on fitness to practice. So, for example, the many bar exams also, many jurisdictions also require an ethics exam, so that not only is the person competent to practice, but they're fit to practice as well. So I think that may be part of the reason that we see such a high level of both. But I do think it's really important that testing organizations really seek to use their test program to at base ensure score validity, and then beyond that there may be reasons to need to consider occurrences of cheating.
Wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate those impressions. Now, I'm going to keep you on the spot, Rachel.
Okay.
Well, first I'm going to hide the poll, and now we're going to move to the Conference on Test Security. Now, Rachel, this was your baby. Can you tell us a little bit about what COTS is and how it's evolved?
Absolutely. So we at ACT were very, very excited to host the Conference on Test Security this year. The conference itself evolved out of the Conference on Statistical Detection of Potential Test Fraud, which was held for the last 2 years at Kansas and then at University of Wisconsin-Madison. The Conference on Statistical Detection of Potential Test Fraud really was deeply focused on statistical and analytic kind of research, which was really, really important, but also raised a lot of questions about, first of all, so if you get one of these flags that say there may have been potential test fraud, what do you do with it? And secondly, are there things that you could have done ahead of time to deter or prevent that fraud in the first place? So following those two conferences, it really made clear that this, the whole discipline of test security needs to be looked at holistically. And the executive committee really recognized that we needed to broaden the conference so that we could take a broader look across the industry at the entire test security framework, not just statistical detection of potential test fraud. So the conference evolved to the Conference on Test Security, which also has, in addition to being related to all things test security, it is also easier to say. It really broadened the scope of the conference to allow presenters to talk about not only how you can detect potential test fraud, which included some really great cutting-edge statistical methods, but how do you deter it, and how do you decide how to respond to it? So whether to investigate, how to investigate, how you can implement appropriate responses. And the change, I think, definitely resonated within our industry. We had an incredible response. In fact, we ended up hitting our 200-person capacity early and had to shut off registration a week earlier than planned. So we were sold out, and we had people from across the U.S. and internationally attending, and from a really broad testing community. So test publishers, statisticians, state departments of education, vendors, test administration, professionals, professional testing staff. And that's really what we wanted, was to create a community of our testing professionals that could look holistically at the entire test security framework. And the result was a really rich exchange of information and 2 days together that were incredibly energizing and informative and insightful.
Awesome. So, John, before I turn it over to you, I need to give a shout out to Rachel's team. So we've all been to conferences, and in many cases the conference is really put on by a promotions or event planning company. They do all the hard work behind the scenes in putting the thing together. That's not what happened here. This was a team of ACT staff that have full-time jobs, they have full-time families, and they pulled off this absolutely stellar event. So huge shout out, not to Rachel specifically, although great job, Rachel, but to her team. They were flawless. It was awesome. So I'll get off my soapbox and turn things over to Dr. John.
I do completely agree with Steve. Rachel was so gracious and nurturing and just made all of us feel at home there. I'm going to do a few sessions, but it will just be a sampling. There were way more sessions that I think are worth following up on than we'll be able to cover. Can other people hear an echo?
It just stopped.
Oh, good. Because I always think, what did I do? But I don't think I actually did anything that time. So I had the privilege of being part of a plenary that followed right after a keynote. So we had everyone in the conference's attention, which if you're a conference speaker is as good as it gets. Because then they talk to you later on. They know who you are, and it makes it so much easier. And try to get that set of slides. We will figure out a way to work with Rachel and make them available, because there's a lot of good content. Wayne Camara of ACT has produced a crosswalk between the previous version of the AERA, APA, and CME standards and the new version around the issue of test security. So what was there before, what's there now, and how do they compare? Terrific resource for those of us who are very standards attentive and driven. Ray Nicosia is always terrific. He's a former journalist, and it shows in his talks. I think those of us who work with a lot of agencies that have security departments could almost feel the envy in the room when Ray said that he has a staff of 63. So Ray's test security unit at ETS has 63 people. So other than places like ETS and ACT, usually there's not a lot of staff. Sometimes it's just the director trying to do 27 things at once, including security. And also in his presentation, there was reinforced something that I think is a very valuable lesson that you can learn from ETS, in that they never, ever use the word cheating at ETS. And I worked there 36 years. You don't even talk about cheating at ETS at a barbecue in the summer. You don't talk to it when you're in church with your friends. You never, ever use the word cheating. What you talk about is failure to confirm the validity of a score. You might think that's cheating, but you won't find ETS using that. I think that's a good practice for all of us. Then Phil Dickerson presented his validity triangle in a very effective way, and as I said, we'll talk more about that in a separate webinar next month. And I talked about how our profession is growing and the kind of evidence I see of test security coming into its own, and I'll say more about that later in this session. Next slide. I worked with Rachel again and with Ben Manis and Mark Weinstein on a particular case. And the next slide is the case. There are a lot of educational folk signed into this webinar, district and state people. And this is a call you don't like to get, but does come in. A parent calls the State Department of Ed and the test publisher hotline. Both of them get the story. The parent says 7th grade daughter said her teacher gave them answers to questions on the year-end statewide assessment. So it brings a chill if you're in that place where that would be a worry, a district or a state. And also that there was another teacher in the room when this occurred, which makes you even more puzzled and worried what exactly was going on there. So we did breakouts. We came up with a lot of information and ideas. I just want to talk about one of the things that we put a lot of emphasis on, and that's the next slide. This was Rachel's contribution. You're going into an investigation. What is it that you're wanting to accomplish? And you see the first two are points we raised earlier. Score validity, stopping future behavior, but also an important goal is likely to be maintaining public confidence in the program and the sponsor. and just what individuals are at fault and what should be done, and then what are the constraints under which you work, which can have to do with legislation, regulations, employment rules, a whole bunch of different things. And work, what Rachel argued for and folks went very much along with, is know about that before you get started. Don't figure that out as you go along, because it's going to cause you grief if you wait and jump in and then stop and ask these questions. Next slide. This is kind of following the process. So you flagged the cheater. Now what? And we had folks heavily invested in that. Amy Hobby Rhodes, Kelly Early, Ben Manis, Joy Matthews-Lopez. Panels don't always work out that well, but this panel worked extremely well. They all had experiences to share, and they fed off each other and elaborated in a very constructive way. And the kinds of things that we learned are in the next two slides. So the next one, having very tight candidate agreements, so particularly in the licensing and certification, and I've heard Rachel talk about this too. Your candidate agreement is a contract. It'll be treated as a contract in a dispute. You better make sure that it says exactly what you want it to say and that you follow it without hesitation. One of our presenters, I think it was Kelly, made a very strong case for collecting and delivering all information about an investigation in writing. Don't be taking notes on a phone call and later on have to face someone and say, oh, I never said that. You got it wrong. You know, well, if they wrote it to you, you could misinterpret, but you could show people what it was that they said. And then finally, it's not enough to have very good data forensics. That's something you need to have. But like I used to hear, I grew up in New York City. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Don't be talking about data forensics until you practice saying that to people who are sympathetic, because you may be explaining data forensics, lady, to people who are not sympathetic. And if people don't understand what you say to them, it's either because they're stupid or you're stupid. And guess what they're going to conclude? You're at fault because they don't understand. Okay, next slide. Isn't there a slide before that one? Can you back up so I can be sure? Oh, backing up is a problem, huh? All right, on to the Certified Exam Security Professional. That was one of our poster sessions at the conference. And the CESP is a certification that's being developed right now. It exists in concept, and the materials to make it happen are underway. And it's a route to a credential that will recognize test security expertise. It's part of what I think of as the evolution of our profession and our industry. And we think down the road there'll be a whole series of them. But right now it's CSP Generalist. That would be the first one out of the box. That would be the beginning of next year. And what is being developed now and will be available are curriculum targets, learning materials, and references. So let me stop there. And are you going to do this next one, Steve, or is that how are we handling that?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce this one. And sorry about that. I'm not quite sure what happened a few seconds ago. But there was another session that I conducted with Rachel, and it was called Protecting Our Tests, the Past, Present, and Future of Test Security, where we explored some of the things going on in testing generally and test security specifically. And John talked about privacy and career readiness. One of the things that we're seeing more and more are new innovative designs that actually protect against the efforts of cheats and pirates. It's becoming so pervasive. Rather than reacting all the time, programs are proactively building inoculation against cheats and pirates. It's cool. And then the last point here is something I want to touch on really quickly. This was raised by one of our clients who is looking to bring on a test security director. And the challenge is, how do you find someone with experience and chops in test security. It's new, it's an evolving field. And so as an industry, as a test security community, we are going to be challenged in building formal training so that as so many programs do grow and expand, we've got a crop of people with real test security chops to fill those roles. Now, a lot of the trends we explored result from this, testing is growing in all kinds of incredible ways. But I think a more interesting question that Rachel explored is, why is there so much growth? And why are we seeing so many test security challenges? Rachel?
Thanks, Steve. I think part of the reason that we're seeing testing is growing and that we're seeing more test security challenges is because our tests are growing more and more valuable. They're used in more industries, they're used by more people, and they're making a difference in education, admissions, career readiness, credentialing. They're making a huge difference, and people are appreciating that value. And like anything, if there's money to be had, then people are going to try and obtain that value, get their piece of that pie, sometimes in dishonest ways. Now, we're not the only industry to face that kind of activity, of course. If we go to the next slide, this is a representation of what the music industry has seen. Just in 10 years, 1 decade, the music industry saw sales drop from $14.6 billion to $7.7 billion just due to an increase in privacy. And if you look at the next slide, according to the International Chamber of Commerce and another entity called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they are estimating that the total value of counterfeit and pirated materials in 2008 was around $285 billion, but by next year, that number they've estimated will grow to as high as $960 billion. So what does that mean? Well, it's both good news and bad news, right, for the testing industry. It means that we have more value that we're offering to society. Nobody knocks off a loser. So the good news is, if you're seeing piracy, if you're seeing test tampering and collusion and other indicators that people are trying to tilt the playing field and gain scores that they haven't earned, well, that's a tangible way of knowing that your exams are making a difference, that they're valuable and meaningful to people, enough so that some will engage in test fraud to gain that value. That's both good news, and now comes the bad news, which is the next slide. Anytime there's money to be had, you can rest assured that a gray or a black market will grow up around your product. It means the more people find value in your test results, the harder you're going to have to work to protect the validity of your results and your reputation. Your reputation for a level playing field and for trustworthy results, that's your gold bars. And it's built on people's perception of validity, fairness, and trust. If you go to the next slide, Steve, we really have to make sure that we're protecting the validity, the fairness, and the trust in our exams to maintain our company's good reputation. That's our gold bar, right? So if you're seeing more piracy and seeing more cheating in an odd way, that bad news is good news. It's not easy news, but it's still good news because it means that people are finding value in what you deliver. If there wasn't value, nobody would go to the effort to steal or cheat. So as testing and the scores we deliver continues to grow in value, we need to protect our good reputation, our gold bars, or there might not be anything left to protect. So that brings us to the next slide, which is the question of how do we do that? And one of the things I feel really strongly about is that we need to shift from a linear rules-based process to a more holistic principles and rules-based framework that is based on those concepts of validity, fairness, and trust. So if you go to the next slide, this is just sort of a way that I think about how I could view the process in the past. So you had test development and design, and rules were sort of passed down from silo through silo. So from test development to test publication to test delivery, and then scoring and reporting. And then at the end of that process, you'd kind of insert test security there just to double check and make sure no one cheated. And that's really, this is really sort of an indicative process of the catch a cheater mentality. What I would assert is we really need to think about this differently and move from this very linear testing process where you just bolt it on at the end to thinking about it from a fundamentally principles-based perspective where you think of the testing life cycle holistically, and at each stage of the testing life cycle integrate test security to do three things: deter conduct that can impact score validity, detect whatever conduct you were unable to deter, and then decide how you want to handle it to resolve that incident, as well as can you better deter or detect in the future. So we really need to integrate deter, detect, and decide capabilities at every phase of the testing life cycle, from design to publication all the way through delivery, scoring, and reporting. And that allows you to proactively assess your test security framework and consider in advance how you want to resolve and respond to security incidents, what type of incidents can be most damaging. Doing that is a much more effective and successful way to ensure your score validity and protect your gold bars than trying to react in the moment when emotions can be high and it's very difficult to make a well-reasoned decision. So just a little bit about deter. The conference had several presentations from individuals who came up with, as you mentioned, Steve, some proactive ways of ensuring with your test design as well as other steps that can be taken to deter misconduct or any kind of activity that can create an unlevel playing field or can impact score validity. But we know we can't stop everything. We want to make it more difficult, even if we can't stop it. But understanding we can't stop everything leads us to the step of detect. And again, we had some fabulous statisticians at the conference who presented some really cutting-edge ideas about statistical detection of attempts to game the system that can be used to detect those attempts, as well as other very effective tools like having proctors and ways for them to report or making hotlines available for people to report anonymously. But then that's not the end of it. It still brings us into the decide piece. And so as we referenced earlier, decide, do you investigate? And if so, what are your goals? If you find that there was an issue after your investigation, how do you best resolve it? And then again, are there things that you can put in place to better deter or detect the incident? Building a holistic test security framework this way really puts us in a very proactive position to protect our testing organization's really valuable gold bars. Steve? This is just an example of the testing life cycle that we would want to make sure that we are integrating at each phase that deter, detect, and decide concept. Steve, do you have any thoughts about that?
I so appreciate this model you've developed, Rachel, and I think it really resonated with the audience. Test security can't be a bolt-on. It's something that must be integrated at every step of the test life cycle. And so from there, I think we're ready to open up for any questions that may be presented. If you have a question about one of these sessions or anything even more general for Rachel or John, please use your dashboard and go from there. Rachel, here's a question. How can people find information about next year's Conference on Test Security?
So next year's Conference on Test Security will be at the University of Kansas, and it will be in the October timeframe again. And it should be some information. It is on at the same website link that this year's conference was at, and I can send that to you again, Steve. But it will be at that same link that you'll be able to start seeing information about timing for next year's conference.
Terrific. here's another question. Are the presentations from COTS going to be available? Is that
Yes,
something people can, okay.
Yes, absolutely. We actually had two different types of concurrent sessions going on at COTS. One was a series of sessions that we called peer review sessions, and presenters at those sessions presented papers to discussants a couple of weeks before the conference. And those papers dealt with the statistical detection of test fraud. And we will have those papers available to attendees as well as any potential discussant comments that were provided. And then the second type of concurrent session was what we called our practitioner sessions. And those were sessions that, much like the ones that we just reviewed here, just provided thoughts and guidance on effective tools, processes, considerations for conducting investigations, and we'll have a book of those presentations available as well. So we're just pulling all of that together now, both the papers and the presentations from the practitioner sessions, and those will be available later this fall.
Thank you, Rachel. John, here's a question. Would it make sense for a smaller exam program to look into the certified exam security professional certification when it becomes available?
I think so. It's certification for individual professionals, so it would be both a way at the test security person's level to show what they know and can do and to kind of measure themselves against current best practices. I hope what will happen over time is that having that credential, because it will be reflective of important knowledge and competencies, will be valuable to the individual in getting jobs and for organizations in evaluating people who are looking for security jobs.
So, thank you. What will be the requirements for completing the CESP, and how will these required courses be offered? Perhaps we should, perhaps, John, sorry to speak for you, but I think when we send out our follow-up materials, perhaps we should have a link to the CESP website where people can get updates and become part of that community. Do you have another reaction, John?
I almost always agree with you, Steve, and I agree here also. There's an entity that's been formed that will be an ongoing source of information, and getting signed up for receiving updates as they come out, I think is a good strategy, even if you're not sure that you're going to go for that credential or be looking for people with it. I think it's an important enough milestone in our field and profession that signing up to learn how it's going is a good strategy.
Excellent. Hey, Rachel, someone wanted to know how can they learn more about and perhaps reference your thoughts on the holistic test security framework for sharing within their organization. When we send out, are you open to having people reach out to you about that?
Absolutely. I would be delighted to talk with folks who may have questions or who are looking to integrate this within their own organizations. I'd be happy to share how we presented it, who we involved in starting to integrate this at each of the phases, and some of the hurdles and successes that we have that maybe others can build upon or avoid as needed. So I would be delighted to have those conversations with anyone who would be interested in learning more.
Now, I just noticed that on our closing, we've got thank yous from Rachel and John, but we don't have emails. So we'll make sure that Rachel's email is included in our follow-up material so that if someone wants to engage with you about that, they've got the means to contact you.
That'd be great. Thanks, Steve.
John, here's a question. Are there free tools available anywhere for testing personnel at a school district to use in identifying failure to achieve test validity on its tests? What tools are available to districts, Doctor?
A lot of work, fortunately, has been done over the past few years. One of the things I would recommend, and I'm a co-editor, so I mean, it's sort of like recommending your children for something, but the TILS guide is available, and we'll send information about that to everyone. It's a product of the Council of Chief State School Officers Technical Issues and Large-Scale Assessment entity, and it's two professionals, John Olson, who's a colleague I have the privilege to work with, and I, and a work group of states. And it's something that you can download for free off the internet, or you can spend the huge sum of about $4.50 and get it from Amazon. So it's widely available, and it's gotten a lot of very positive press. It has sections on just that kind of issue. What can I do? I don't have a big staff. I don't have Ray Nicosia's 63 staff at ETS. It's me and maybe one or two others, and we want to do something. But it's just as important in our school or district to have validity as if it's a large place. So I recommend that. I also recommend, and this is not free, the book, the Handbook of Test Security, which, again, I have a new career. It's to be the second author for things. But I'm the second author with Jim Wallach, who was the lead person at last year's conference, Statistical Detection of Test Fraud at University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's worth, I think, looking up. And if you're measurement-oriented, you should acquire it, even though it's quite a bit of money. If you are an interested party and not a measurement person, I'm not sure that you want to get it. It's quite a formidable book, but it does have sections on classroom assessment and deterring and detecting cheating. So I recommend that also. And I'll just do one more. If you Google or Yahoo or something and look up the NCME document on testing and state assessment, there's a lot of good ideas in that. It's about a year and a half old now, and you could probably also find it if you search under Greg Cizik, and then we will include all three of these possibilities in our written response to these questions.
Excellent. We have quite a few more questions, and we've got some time, so that's excellent. One person asked, they want to see the slide from this presentation on Rachel's investigative goals. And what we'll do is we'll send you these slides so that you can see those no later than, I think, Monday. So you'll have those goals available to you shortly. Rachel, have there been any changes planned for COTS next year based on feedback this year? Has there been a chance to sort of exhale and debrief and think about what changes may occur?
It's a great question, Steve. Actually, we want to reach out to attendees and get their input on what worked well, what might they like to see differently. I do think next year it won't be a change, but rather a continuation that will continue to have that sort of concurrent track of peer review and practitioner sessions, and we had really fabulous feedback even on the poster sessions. So I think we will definitely look at continuing those. But as far as changes, we really want to reach out to attendees and get their thoughts on what would be a good way to continue to improve the conference. And that will be coming out hopefully in the next week or two so that people can respond in time for us to make some changes for next year.
That's fantastic. So I've just been alerted, I should have known this, but there are quite a few questions about CESP, the Certified Exam Security Professional. Now, the website is cespcert.org. And I don't think we'll be able to address all the particular questions, but when we follow up, we'll include email for Jamie Mulkey, one of my esteemed colleagues, and she is heading up the Institute for Exam Security, which is the nonprofit that will be managing the CESP. So we'll provide those details too. Here's a question. John, you talked about tight candidate agreements. Is there an example that people can look at for ideas on making sure their candidate agreement is up to snuff?
Yes, we can give references to all of the folks who attended this webinar. This has been given a lot of thought, and including dealing with challenges in legal settings, in courts and hearings and regulatory events and the like. And so you'll want to look at these samples, but sort of the key message is you have to specify exactly what you're allowed to do and exactly what you're not allowed to do, and what the testing organization is going to do. If you're going to do detailed analyses of the test takers' results and there could be consequences, you need to tell them that, so that when they are signing up, they are acknowledging that they know that there are going to be analyses made of their tests, and they may, for example, be required to produce additional information, or in, I shouldn't try to talk like a lawyer because we have racial here, but if in their sole judgment that you cannot provide information that the testing agency can have confidence in the validity of your score, they will not report it. So if that's something you're prepared to do, you want to tell the test taker that that's the way it is. Things are different in a school setting. Often it's not, you know, the agreement is different and has different meaning when you're talking about youngsters who are taking the test. But even there, what are the rules? Because some of our interest in school testing is not what the kids do. It's one of the interests, but what do the adults do? And what do all the rules say there?
So, John, thank you. I have two other comments on the candidate agreement question. First, if you happen to be a member of ATP, the ATP Security Committee has some very helpful materials regarding candidate rights and responsibilities. And so that might be helpful. Also, we have conducted webinars in the past on different legal topics regarding testing and test security, including candidate agreements, where we've had input from wonderful attorneys who really know the testing space, like Jennifer Semko and Mark Weinstein of Dilworth and Paxton. And so on the Caveon webpage, you can go to resources and find these past webinars specifically focused on these topics. There's another question on the concept of test security being a score validity issue, and if we have resources on that. Next month, I believe, Phil Dickinson, if it's not next month, the month after, we just have to coordinate schedules. Phil Dickinson, who is the executive director of the NCLEX, the nursing test, is going to be presenting specifically on that topic. So stay tuned for details on that.
Steve, would it be okay if I just follow up for a minute too?
Yeah, please, please.
I think one of the things that's really helpful to know is that as testing organizations, the case law has been really clear that when testing organizations have taken action to invalidate scores that they are concerned are not accurate reflections of the examinee's own academic achievements or competencies, that courts are very willing to defer to the judgment of the testing companies as long as, and that goes back to something John said, there were clear examinee agreements in place, the organizations followed those in good faith, and had a good faith and reasonable belief that the scores themselves were not valid. One thing that our keynote speaker said at COTS is one number is not an argument. And the cases that have been challenged so far, they haven't been canceled based on one statistical flag. But there has been statistical evidence as well as other evidence that corroborates or supports the aberrations raised from the statistics. And if the organization followed its process and had a good faith and reasonable belief that that score was not valid, case after case has consistently come out in favor of the testing organizations who have decided to cancel those scores. So I want to throw that out there as we start looking at, is this a question about catching a cheater? Is it a question about score validity? Is it potentially a question about both? I think at base, it's, we're doing what we're doing to ensure that the information, the valuable information we're providing to people or to people who make decisions about other people can be relied upon. And so courts are willing to uphold our judgment as testing organizations if we have a well thought out and holistic plan in place that allows us to reasonably reach those conclusions.
Wonderful. I have one other thought on this, on this question of resources around validity. One of the most powerful presentations I've seen on this topic was shared by Dr. Greg Cizik of University of North Carolina at the National Council of State Assessments a year ago. Now, Greg is former president of the National Council of Measurement and Education, very, very renowned, and he actually presented on this topic and allowed that presentation to be shared on the Caveon blog. And I think we'll include a link to that in the follow-up materials if this audience thinks that could be helpful. Now, we've got a few more minutes. So, Rachel?
Yes.
Can someone speak a little more about the reluctance to use the word cheating? In Atlanta, for example, educators clearly cheated. Why wouldn't we call it what it is?
Well, I think, again, I'm going to speak first to score validity because the first thing that we're caring about as, I think, testing organization professionals is that our scores are valid. And if they're invalid for whatever reason, because of negligence, because of nefarious attempts to game the system, too much time, too little time, intentional pre-exposure of items, unintentional pre-exposure of items, sharing content, any of those kinds of things, at base we want to make sure that we are not putting information that's not reliable, that's not valid, out into the market, and especially as these scores become more valuable and used for more purposes, making sure that we're giving people trustworthy information that they can draw valid insights from and solid insights from. Part of the reason we avoid the term cheater is because particularly if we don't need to apply that label, and I'll kind of harken back to something I said earlier in just a moment, but if you don't need to apply that label, there's good reason for it. It really sort of requires additional evidence on the part of investigators to start to prove intent, and requires labeling someone, or labeling their activities at least, with a term that can actually raise liability for your organization. So Steve, if I were to call you a cheater and publish that, there could be, whether I say it or whether I write it, there could be libel or slander claims brought against my organization if I can't prove that you actually cheated. However, what I can say is, and so that requires different evidence. What it would be safer for me as an organization to say is simply, Steve took an assessment, and I don't feel I don't feel that I can reasonably and in good faith report these scores as valid. That brings a completely different context, and it avoids a label that may not be necessary. Now, I did say I was going to circle back to something else, which is in some professions, particularly in the credentialing space, there may be a need for people to say, if you engage in certain behavior, I am going to find that you are not fit to be part of a certain profession. So, for example, in the financial industry or the legal industry, there are often fitness requirements that go beyond your competency and your ability to master the skills required to practice, but they actually go to your ethics. And in those instances, if it's not just a score validity issue due to negligence or some type of behavior, but really a fitness issue, they may and do go beyond just checking the score validity to saying this is a person who is not fit to practice this profession. And so we're keeping them out because of that. So I hope that was a good explanation for why in many instances, in all instances, we should be concerned about score validity. But in many instances, we can take action without needing to label someone and deal with that increased liability and increased, frankly, emotional charge that comes with that type of a label.
Excellent. So we're bumping up on the hour. We always strive to keep these sessions within 60 minutes. Dr. John, I know that you have another commitment, so I will do my best to wrap things up without you. I want to thank Rachel Schoenig. She is a super busy lady. She's a super smart lady. And thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing some of your recent experiences at COTS and your general experience and knowledge in test security with this audience. I think it was very appropriate and very well received. I want to thank all of our audience. Thanks for taking time out of very hectic schedules to join us. And if you have any feedback on the session, please feel free to share it as we distribute follow-up materials. We want to make sure we're providing useful, helpful content. A rising test security tides lifts all boats in all of our programs. So without further ado, I think we will call this a wrap and look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, everybody.